Hello, good day, good evening, everybody who's watching and listening. I called this little Facebook Live video Mary 101. And of course, it sounds like, a basic course in American universities, which always seem to be 101 when they're designed for freshmen. But this isn't a basic introductory course to Mary Burmeister. Some reflections, maybe. It's just that today, she would have been 101 years old, and that's a time to reflect and remember. It was a privilege to be her student, and when we say that, and we tend to say that about any teacher who's been a really important influence in our lives, there's always that risk of, glorifying, of idealizing the person. And it's very special to have had a teacher like Mary Burmeister, because the very last thing she wanted, and she was extremely diligent at letting us know that, was to be made a master, made a reference, glorified, put on a pedestal of any sort. So it's always interesting to reflect. Last year she would have been 100, and of course there was a lot of remembrance going on. And I think it's safe to say that there are as many versions of Mary as there were students she had. Each student she ever had probably has their own private version of who she was to them. And what's more, I think there are probably also many, many versions of who Mary Burmeister really was out there among those who actually didn't know her, who didn't study with her or never met her at all. And that's just what we humans do. I mean, those of us who did study with her, from what limited amount of time we spent in class with her, we made this image of who she was to us. And as long as we don't fall into the illusion that that's who she really was, and anybody who didn't see her that way just didn't see her right, that's okay. Because that's what we humans do, we see a part of it all, and not the whole, generally. For those who didn't experience her live, it's a little more tricky, because you rely on stories that people like myself or all the other many students she had tell you, and you rely on what's printed. And the more you rely on what's black on white and what little video footage exists of Mary, the greater the danger that you'll reduce Mary to something that is much, much smaller than what she was. And to me, one of the things that's always so important, especially as time goes by, it'll have been almost 30 years. It'll have been 30 years next February since Mary taught the very last class she ever taught. So she didn't pass away until 2008, but she stopped teaching after her fall, and I believe she taught her last class in January of 1990, actually. So, memory always does a trick on us. Remembering is always fictionalizing to an extent. And so I believe, in a way, the best we can do to be true to ourselves and the memory of the person we're referring to is by A, recognizing that it'll change all the time, and then B, talking about what's still present of that person in any of us today. And one of the things that I just keep remembering is how alive Mary was with the material, how much she changed from one presentation to the next, how particularly she kept simplifying and simplifying and simplifying and saying, simplify, simplify, simplify. In other words, she kept taking technicity out of Jin Shin Jitsu and putting the art more and more into Jin Shin Jitsu, all the while understanding that, of course, true art doesn't mean at all anything goes, but it also can never mean do as I've done and keep repeating this and you'll be an artist, because that's when the art dies, obviously. So when we look at people who have influenced us greatly, today is not only Mary's 101st birthday, it's also the 88th birthday of my key teacher, Eileen Pasloff, who introduced me to Jiu-Jitsu that she had learned from Mary Burmeister 37 years ago. And Eileen had a dance concert just on the eve of her birthday, which is lovely. She's still around, and of course she's always changing. And the lesson that both of them leave with me is that profound, that heartfelt encouragement to be who I am. You're a precious one of a kind, Mary said. And again, without, by far, by any stretch of the imagination, meaning anything goes. Neither of those women would stand by anything goes. That was an invitation for us, for each of us, to be constantly discovering, to be constantly finding out yet again and yet again and yet again in the moment, who am I now? Who am I now? What next layer do I have access to be real, to be alive, to be juicy, to feel this earth, this body, this moment now, this touch. And not to glorify the person, just to underline the value of what we got from them is another very important thing. Mary was so clear and so transparent about her humanness. So some of her message is obviously timeless, because there are certain things like be the smile, drop your shoulders. It's simply getting to know, help myself, that are timeless, at least as long as you keep them alive in your mind and heart, as you feel something when you say those things. And some things are, and that is perfectly all right, and it isn't possible any other way in human existence, some of the things about any of us, you, me, and Mary, and any other person who's a reference to any of us, some of what we are about strictly belongs to the time we were born into, to the cultural context we were born into, and it dates. It dates. I mean, the way I dressed when I first worked as an interpreter for 5-day classes, I don't know, 3 decades ago or something like that. It dates horribly, and that's just a fashion detail. Mary was so 80s in some ways, in my experience, but that, of course, was because I experienced her in the 80s. Some of the ways she dressed, and some of the things she said, and some of the values she held are obviously due to the time that she was born and the culture she was born into, and don't hold forever. It's easy, I find, to pierce to the timeless bottom of what she was about. Straightforwardness, simplicity, simplification, turning inward, listening to the moment, and going with the flow. These things are essential, and as I believe I mentioned last year on her 100th birthday, it's for each of us to find out the perfect imperfection of just how much of what she used to do we keep doing because we think that's the way to travel, and how much we attempt to emulate in our own way the kind of aliveness we felt in her or any other living teacher. To me, I don't even know if I, or anyone else, but I'll speak of myself, am able to quote Mary faithfully. What does that mean? Reading words from a page that have been printed is one way, of course, of thinking you quote her faithfully. But if from somebody in whose way of being with the world, oral teaching was such a huge part. Mary said so many things only in her oral teachings, in her classes, that many of us wrote down in different versions, but that are not in print anywhere. Even the book What Mary Says is just a collection derived from people's notes about what she had said and how they had heard it. So when you quote somebody whose teaching was so largely oral and whose true teaching was so largely about who she was and how she lived and what she emanated while she was teaching, I can't separate out from what she said from how it went to work in my cells as I was sitting in class. I felt that something that was way beyond the verbal level was happening on cell level, and I'm not saying that in any grandiose or fantastic sense. It's just an experience. It was my experience. My experience was I don't know exactly what's happening, but something is working on cell level here in me. I don't exactly know how the things she is saying are touching me, but they're going to work right away. So what, and how do you quote that? How do you quote the part of any true learning, of any true contact with a person who's truly alive that touches you on cell level? Your mind, because it's trained to do so, latches on to snippets of words that she's saying and snippets of words that you manage to write down. With any luck, you write down what she actually said, but very often in our humanness, you write down some version of what she almost, but not quite, did say. But that's what the mind does. The mind hangs on to these quotable snippets, which are often so much less than the living essence of what was being conveyed. Which Mary do you believe? The one who writes in her textbook, do not rub, massage, or use much pressure? Or the Mary who went to work with a very firm touch? And who do you become? How do you touch? Do you think the way to be faithful is to follow what's printed, to follow what Mary did? Or, knowing about both of those aspects, finding your own dialogue with the body, your body as the practitioners, and the client's body in the moment? Some of you know that that was part of my journey. In the beginning, I experienced Eileen's touch, which applied no pressure, and while it didn't apply any pressure, felt like it was miles inside my body, but not in an invasive way. I just felt that this was a touch that listened to me, that this was a touch that knew about me, that meant me, that afforded me all the space. And yet, when I say I felt that touch deeply inside of me, I felt that a listening ability, not a spying on me or knowing me better than I myself did, or some such mysterious and slightly invasive thing. None of that, but I felt that, I don't want to sound pretentious with this, but there was a witnessing action going on, in the most obtrusive, kind of way. So that's a touch that really listens, that doesn't want to know anything about the other, but is willing to listen and hear something from the other, then to leave it in an open space and not to make it into something. That kind of listening I found to be my reference in the long run. But once I had started studying with Mary and was being mentored by Philomena Dooley, I also for a while played with that firmer touch. And I never experienced either Mary's or Philomena's touch as a senselessly firm one, as a brutal one, as an invasive one. And yet I, for myself, had to depart from it because that's my way. I needed to dialogue with bodies and need to dialogue with bodies through my touch in a way that allows the body to take the lead, not me and my supposed knowledge. So I feel that the encouragement to be my own artist is everywhere in Mary's teaching, and that's what I would encourage any of you to also do and find and be. It's a moment to be deeply grateful for one who will not shy from being so clearly herself, that in a way she can truly say it's not about me, while in another way it totally is. She was able to let the message pass as it would in the moment, and that skill, of course, is a very highly developed skill. So in that sense, it was all about her, you know. So everybody went to this one person, this one teacher who, you know, she was the one teacher for many, many years. And it was all about that. We'd go to listen to Mary. We'd go to listen to Mary. We'd all go to listen to Mary. It was all about her. It wasn't about that thing that we could hardly pronounce. And yet it wasn't a personality cult. It was the authenticity. It was all about this woman who said it wasn't about her. It was all about this woman who said it wasn't about her and believed that it wasn't about her. Enough said for today. Go back maybe today and study or simply look at some of her writing, if you have any, her self-help books in their strangely simple language, which is so wonderful when we slow down to the pace of it. Or some of those more mysterious sentences in her textbooks, like the one in textbook 2, where she says that a profound, mysterious transformation occurs with the intermingling of flesh and consciousness and such things. And just sit with that and sit with the fact that possibly you can't make linear sense of it, while at the same time holding something, maybe a thumb or finger, and being with just what it means to be the jumper cable. In British English that would be the jump lead, you know, the cable, just the channel. What truly does it mean? What truly does it mean to just be the allower of something that circulates and passes and flows? Have a lovely day on this 101st birthday of Mary's. Thank you very much, Mary, for your life's work and your rich legacy. And thank you all for carrying this legacy, each one in your own way, and for being companions on this blessed journey that we all take in our great diversity.